Okay, picture this. It's the 1800s. You've got gaslight flickering, concert halls packed across Europe. And then this violinist appears. I mean, his skill is just so unreal, so like otherworldly, that people start whispering, then saying outright he must have sold his soul to the devil.
It's really something, isn't it? How a musician's sheer talent could spark these almost supernatural ideas.
Exactly. And that's the whole mystery we're getting into today. This deep dive is all about the incredible life and the really persistent legend of Niccolò Paganini. We'll be digging into accounts of his performances, which sound insane, and all these bizarre myths that just stuck to him.
Yeah, our goal here is really to try and separate the man from the myth, you know? Unpack the facts behind this whole diabolical violinist thing and figure out why this story took hold. It gives you such a fascinating window into celebrity back then.
Totally. And we've got some amazing source material. We'll look at his big Paris debut in 1831, his really tough early life and training, how he toured constantly while Europe was kind of recovering from war.
Right, and how his health problems, weirdly, seemed to boost his mystique, plus his public image, which he seemed to cultivate.
Oh, yeah. And the story of his violin, Il Canon, his, let's say, colorful personal life, how the devil rumors just kept escalating.
And the consequences of that, right up to his final years, and then this absolutely unbelievable saga of his body after he died. It's quite a story.
It really is. Okay, so let's start where the international frenzy really kicked off. Paris.
Right. March 1831. Picture the scene. The Paris Opera, all grand and buzzing, the audience is just waiting, and then Paganini walks out.
And just his appearance was something else. Tall, incredibly thin, like gaunt, almost hollow cheeks, long black hair kind of flowing. He sounds like a character from a Gothic novel, honestly.
He really did. And then he starts playing, and the descriptions from the time, they talk about techniques that were just, well, unheard of.
Like what?
Things like plucking the strings with his left hand while he's bowing with his right, making these huge jumps between notes, super high to super low, almost like a voice. And the bow itself just dancing, creating this shower of sound. Ricochet bowing, they called it.
It was...
Yeah, a soundscape nobody in Paris had experienced.
And the reaction, it sounds like it was chaos.
Pretty much. You read about people actually fainting. Critics were literally speechless. And those rumors that had been bubbling up in Italy about a deal with the devil, they just exploded in Paris. Everyone seemed to believe it.
Wow. But if you look at his early life, it wasn't exactly diabolical, right? It was just music focused and tough.
Very tough. He was born in Genoa, 1782. Grew up in those tight, winding alleys near the docks, the Carughi. Not a privileged start, but his father, a customs clerk, I think, saw his talent early on.
And pushed him incredibly hard. There's stories in the sources about him being forced to practice for hours and hours. Neighbors apparently heard him crying while practicing scales before sunrise. That's a lot.
It's an insane level of pressure, yeah. But it wasn't just scales. He was soaking everything up, the fancy stuff like Corelli and Tartini, but also the local folk tunes, you know?
Now he had this incredible foundation.
Absolutely. By 12, they say he was ghostwriting sonatas for other violinists. By 15, giving concerts. His technique was already so dazzling that, get this, local priests were warning people not to go listen because they thought it might be, well, satanic.
Already? Wow, so that perception started really early.
It seems like it, which makes you wonder, what was it about his playing specifically?
Good question. Then, Europe gets turned upside down by the Napoleonic Wars. You'd think that would kill a touring musician's career.
You'd think so, but weirdly, it kind of opened things up. Old courts were scattered, orchestras disrupted, people were desperate for entertainment, for something amazing, and Paganini, with this jaw-dropping skill, was perfectly placed. He just went everywhere, played for anyone.
Sounds kind of rootless, though, moving around constantly,
Right.
And the sources mention he loved to gamble, apparently won and lost fortunes pretty regularly.
Yeah, he definitely lived life on his own terms, and musically, he was writing stuff specifically for himself. For his own body, almost.
What do you mean?
Well, apparently his hands were unusually large, fingers really long and flexible. It let him do things on the violin that other people physically just couldn't. So his compositions showcased these unique gifts. It's fascinating how his body shaped his music.
But physically, he wasn't exactly strong, was he? Had measles as a kid, then later, syphilis, chronic bleeding issues, often looked frail.
Yeah, definitely not robust. But here's the paradox. That gaunt, almost ghostly look, combined with these periods where he'd be sick and disappear, then come back even more brilliant, it just fueled the whole mystique.
Right. It played into that idea that he wasn't quite normal, maybe not entirely human. You can see how all these threads, the look, the lifestyle, the talent, start weaving together into this legend.
Exactly. And by the time he hits Vienna in 1828, the mythology is way ahead of him. It's not just gossip now. You've got satirical cartoons showing him as the devil Mephistopheles.
And those crazy pamphlets claiming he'd, murdered someone and used their guts for violin strings? That's insane.
Utterly bonkers. And in Prague, apparently, churchgoers wanted his sheet music checked for hidden backward prayers. The public imagination just ran wild.
And Paganini himself. He wasn't exactly pouring water on the fire, was he?
Not at all. It seems he kind of played into it. The black gloves he wore until the second he started playing, insisting on practicing alone behind locked doors using dramatic lighting.
Yeah.
It all added to the mystery.
He knew what he was doing.
Oh, absolutely. He understood image. Every rumor, every bit of superstition. It was basically free publicity, right? And it definitely helped him charge those massive fees. You have to wonder how much was deliberate marketing.
So speaking of the diabolical, let's talk about his violin. Il Canon, the Canon.
Yeah, what a name, and apparently it lived up to it. Made in 1743 by Guarneri del Gesù, top-tier maker, known for deep, powerful instruments. Il Canon had this dark look, deep sides, and a booming low sound.
And audiences felt there was something more to its sound.
Yeah. They described it like sonic sorcery, like the wood itself was roaring, almost like brass sometimes. It just fit perfectly with the idea that something unnatural was going on. Black magic, basically.
And the legendary string-breaking stories.
Oh, yeah. The accounts say a string would snap mid-performance, which probably did happen sometimes. Gut strings back then weren't super reliable, but he'd just carry on playing the whole piece flawlessly on the remaining 3 strings.
Wow.
Pure mastery. Using harmonics, those high whistling tones you can get without fully pressing the string down to suggest the missing notes. It just reinforced this idea of impossible skill.
But his life off stage was also pretty scandalous for the time, feeding the legend in a different way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
His relationship with the singer Antonia Bianchi was a big one. They weren't married, they had a son, Achille, and they toured together. Huge scandal back then.
Plus the gambling we mentioned earlier, losing huge amounts, pawning his stuff. It paints a picture of someone living way outside the lines.
And interestingly, instead of ruining him, these scandals seem to make him even more famous, more intriguing.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Royalty are desperate to hear him. You mentioned Warsaw people ripping buttons off his coat for souvenirs.
Yeah. In Frankfurt, 15 curtain calls. 15. Even when London had strict cholera quarantines, massive crowds just ignored them to get a ticket. That's where Paganini-mania actually came from as a term. Hard to imagine that level of obsession today. But eventually the devil rumors started to cause real problems, didn't they? Beyond just gossip.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Church officials in Rome started leaning on theaters, trying to get his concerts canceled during Lent. That would have hurt financially. And in Strasbourg, some magistrate actually investigated him for leprosy because he looked so pale and thin.
Wow. But his response was classic Paganini, right? He didn't really fight the rumors head on.
No. He almost seemed to enjoy poking the bear. Dedicating pieces to amateurs of hell, writing devil and music on scores, apparently wearing spectacles painted with flames to rehearsals.
It's like theatrical defiance, isn't it? Almost performance art.
But underneath all that, his health was really failing. The treatments for syphilis back then involved mercury, which is basically poison. He had recurring hemorrhages, his voice started going. Sounds like he was in a lot of pain.
Yeah, by 1838, he basically had to stop performing regularly. He moved down to Nice, hoping the milder climate would help. But even then, he was thinking about his legacy, set up the Paganini Prize for young players, had ideas for a conservatory.
And then, right at the end, he refused last rites. He thought he'd get better.
Yeah, and that decision, that had huge, really weird consequences after he died.
Okay, so he dies in Nice, May 1840.
Mm-hmm.
Probably internal bleeding, maybe complications from laryngeal cancer too. And because he hadn't had the last rites.
The Bishop of Nice refused to let him be buried in consecrated ground. Boom! Suddenly, the devil rumors weren't just stories anymore. They were the official reason he couldn't have a Christian burial.
And what happened next is just macabre. His body gets embalmed, and then it just gets moved around for years.
For years. First, it was apparently stored in a hospital basement. Then, apparently it started to smell, so they moved it to an abandoned leper house outside the city.
Oh, my God.
It's unbelievable. His body was stuck in this horrible bureaucratic limbo. Burial requests just bounced around different church authorities. Nobody wanted to touch it because of the superstition.
And his core son, Achille. dealing with legal fights over the will and trying to get his dad buried.
Took him 4 years, until 1844, just to get permission to move the coffin still unburied to a private cellar on the family estate. Imagine that, your famous father's body in the basement.
Grim. So when did he finally get buried properly?
Not until 1876. 36 years after he died, Pope Pius IX finally gave permission for a Christian burial in Parma. But even that wasn't the absolute end.
What else?
In 1893, they dug him up again and moved him to a fancy marble crypt with symbolic carvings and everything. It's just this extraordinary post-death saga that, of course, just added more fuel to the fire.
You can imagine. New legends probably popped up about the coffin moving around.
Oh, absolutely. Stories about hearing violin music coming from it or seeing Satan himself writing on the hearse. Gothic horror stuff.
And as the sources note, all these spooky stories kept selling his sheet music long after he was gone.
Definitely. And then you have someone like Franz Liszt, the piano megastar, taking Paganini's incredibly difficult violin caprices and turning them into equally impossible piano pieces. That really cemented Paganini as just a byword for, like, superhuman skill.
So looking back now, historians tried to find real-world explanations for him, right?
Yeah.
Medical reasons.
Yeah, there's speculation about things like Marfan syndrome. It's genetic, causes tallness, long limbs, hyperflexible joints. That fits the descriptions pretty well.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the mercury poisoning from the syphilis treatment, plus chronic digestive problems that could easily explain the gauntness and constant illness.
And apparently his letters show a different side, more human.
Yeah, you see him worrying about his son Achille, giving really sharp musical advice, even having this sort of dry, surprising sense of humor. There's a funny story about him hiding sausages in some rival violinist's case.
Okay, so a real person under the myth.
Definitely, but the myth is stubborn, you know. Violinists still go to Genoa to see Il Canone, his violin, and people still talk about feeling some kind of presence when they play it. The legend endures.
And his actual musical impact is undeniable. Those techniques he invented are still the gold standard for virtuosos.
Absolutely. He basically invented the flamboyant soloist persona, the rock star of the concert hall. He understood that virtuosity wasn't just playing notes, it was theater, it was about risk.
And he was clearly a master of using perception, right? Leveraging those superstitions.
A marketing genius, in a way. He knew how to play the game, how to use suggestion.
So the final verdict. Was he actually diabolical?
Well, theologically speaking, no, of course not. But he was incredibly skilled at using suggestion, playing with that image. And ironically, the church, by reacting the way it did, by refusing burial for so long, they might have done more to cement the devil legend than Paganini ever did himself.
Fascinating point. It really gives you pause. Okay, so wrapping this up, we've seen Paganini's just mind-blowing virtuosity, how he carefully built this public image, the sheer power of rumor and superstition back then, and how his musical innovations still resonate today. It all came together to create this unforgettable figure.
It really did. And it kind of leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? Think about celebrity today, how perception is shaped now in our hyper-connected world. Are the legends we build around famous people now, you know, fueled by social media and clicks, really any less weird or fantastical than the stories about Paganini? What kinds of devils do we invent now to explain people who capture our imagination?